The Olympics may be happening right now, but there's still a heck of a lot happening in the world of college wrestling. Like, what's going on with Oklahoma leaving the Big 12? Let's stop stalling and start talking wrestling. What's going on, wrestling fans? My name's Josiah, and welcome to Fanco Wrestling, your source for college wrestling news and discussion. And at this point of the year, I put an emphasis on college wrestling because Fanco Wrestling is a college wrestling focused news site. So there's not a whole lot going on that I'm going to be talking about the Olympics. I'll talk a bit about the results probably in next week's wrestling headlines, but I did want to put that at the start of the show. If you're interested in the schedule and what's going on with the Olympics, how you can watch the men's freestyle this week, as well as a lot of the other events, you can check out FancoWrestling.com. But with that out of the way, let's talk about the first big topic of the day. And the first thing is Oklahoma leaving the Big 12. This is a crazy thing happening in college football right now. This is, of course, where it started, with Oklahoma and Texas deciding that they're going to leave the Big 12, and they are going over to the SEC. And of course, that's awesome in football that Oklahoma and Texas are going over there, but that leaves a lot in the air for wrestling. What does that even mean for wrestling? Because there's no SEC wrestling. There's no SEC. And there's no, I would love it if there's SEC in wrestling, but there isn't. So some schools are deciding to maybe stick together. Some schools are deciding that they want to leave the Big 12, and there's really not a lot that we know at the moment. But what does it mean for wrestling? Like with West Virginia and Oklahoma State and others, would they leave the Big 12? I mean, Fresno State, who was in the Big 12, just got dropped, so who knows what's going on there. But let's look at conferences that could align and maybe a likely scenario that Oklahoma leaves the Big 12. I mean, I think it is a likely scenario right now that Oklahoma will be the school that leaves the Big 12. But will they go to the SoCon? There's been some talks about that. Will they go to the Big 10? Probably unlikely. The Pac-12 or maybe the MAC, I think those two conferences are more likely where Oklahoma goes over to there. I think it's a good shift. And it's also kind of funny because there's another school that just actually left the MAC and went into the Big 12, and that, of course, is Mizzou. And Mizzou decided that they were going to leave the MAC last year and come back to the Big 12. It was huge. It was exciting news just a couple of months ago. Well, now they don't know what's going to happen. So I suspect that they're probably going to go back to the MAC, and Oklahoma may follow them to the MAC. Now, the thing here is Pac-12 also said, a couple of months ago, they said that they have a big interest in expanding the conference, expanding wrestling, expanding the conference, and bringing other teams in. This may be their opportunity to expand the Pac-12 and bring a lot of other teams in. Now, look, the truth is nobody really knows what's going to happen with this realignment yet, but it is fun to speculate as far as what is happening. Now, one cool thing before we head on to Spencer Lee's launching a deal with Barstool Sports and a couple of coaching extensions, I want to mention this article talking about the Big 12, actually, and Mitch Moore and his decision transferring from Virginia Tech and the ACC to the Big 12 at Oklahoma, and what he's kind of learned along the process, what he's learned from his blood round loss this past year. Is very interesting article from Fanco Wrestling's new writer, Jake, and so I wanted to highlight that article. You can check that out down in the description or on FancoWrestling.com. But Kevin Dresser and Tom Brands both received contract extensions, pretty hefty contract extensions, actually. And this is interesting news because, of course, Dresser in the Big 12 at Iowa State, but Brands, of course, in the Big 10, and there's not a crazy, this isn't crazy exciting news. It's not, I mean, I guess if you're an Iowa fan or an Iowa State fan, it's exciting news, but like, it's not crazy big news. It's great that they both got these contract extensions, but both of them have just been doing so well in their programs. I mean, you look at Kevin Dresser and what he's done at Iowa State for the Cyclones, just the last 4 seasons alone, they had a national champion this year in David Carr. That was huge for the program, and he's back in the lineup next year. And then you want to talk about Tom Brands, who is returning all of his starters and a bunch of All-Americans, as well as winning a national title. I mean, for the first time in many years, that was huge for Iowa and for the Hawkeyes. So it's not a huge surprise, I guess I should say, that these guys are getting coaching extensions. But one thing, speaking of Iowa, Spencer Lee launched the first ever student-athlete deal with Barstool Sports. This was really awesome news. You've seen over the last month, as student-athletes start to look at what they can and cannot do with the new name, image, and likeness rules, you've seen a couple of clothing lines launch. Roman Bravo Young is looking to launch a clothing line. AJ Ferrari's already launched some shirts. Spencer Lee's actually launching his own clothing line in partnership with another brand, but he launched a shirt with Barstool Sports and became an athlete with them and is making money off of this deal, which is awesome. Awesome for Spencer Lee, awesome for Barstool Sports. It's really cool that out of all these sports out there, right, with big name football players, big name basketball players, all these other sports, that Spencer Lee, the wrestler, is the first ever athlete to get a shirt with Barstool Sports. I actually have it linked up down in the description if you want to go buy it yourself, but I was amped up to read this, and with all these things happening with NIL, it's super interesting to see where these deals go, because these are shirts, I mean, you would not have been able to get this shirt last year. It would have been illegal for Spencer Lee to make this, but now it's super cool that he can actually have this. Now, what else is happening in wrestling? Of course, with the Olympics, that's super fun to watch. There aren't really any college wrestling events, but there are still a couple of wrestling events happening in the month of August that you should be on the lookout for. And first up, I want to talk about Stalemates Street League. Stalemates Street League is run by the Stalemates account on Twitter and on YouTube, and they are running this event happening in Iowa. And basically what it is, it's like a street level wrestling match with certain rules. The periods are switched up. The rules are a little bit differently, but they're bringing in guys, some of them D1 guys, D2 guys. They're making some of those matches happen, as well as some guys who just haven't wrestled in quite a long time. But the big headliner of the event is Kyvan Gadsden and Pat Downey, two guys who you wouldn't necessarily expect to see wrestle, but they've been going at it for the past month on social media, which has been fun to watch. And this event it's awesome because it's happening in Iowa, as well as on Patreon, Stalemates Patreon. I have that information linked up, but it's interesting to see because we're used to seeing these really big events put on, by the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club or by Flow Wrestling or whoever else. It's cool to see this kind of amateur event being put on at such a big scale, and I'm excited to watch it. That's happening on August 13th. And the other big event, which is also kind of inspired by Barstool. We talked about Barstool a bit with Spencer Lee, but Barstool Rough and Rowdy amateur boxing events. Now, full disclosure, I've never watched any of those events. I'm not really in any of those events, but both these events, the Stalemate Street League, as well as the Wrangle in the Wild being put on by the Hidlay brothers on August 7th, were inspired by Barstool and what they've done with those events. So Hayden Hidlay will actually be wrestling at this event on August 7th, which I don't know about you, but I'm pumped to see this, especially with Hayden bumping up and with Trent being both these guys are national finalists who are brothers wrestling in the main event. They're doing a similar thing to Stalemates in that they are putting an event on with guys back actually from their hometown in Mifflin County, Pennsylvania, getting guys who haven't wrestled in quite some time and getting them to wrestle each other and pulling them back in, getting them to train a bit. But they're pulling this together pretty fast. The event is happening on August 7th in Pennsylvania. They actually are selling tickets for this, or you can watch live on Rockfin. For me, though, I think what's really neat about it is that this is just brand building for the Hidlay brothers. They're working on ways how they can make money through wrestling now that with the new name, image, and likeness rules, which I think is just super fantastic to see. So will you be checking out either of these events? I'm interested in knowing that. And really, I'm also interested in mostly, what do you think about the Oklahoma leaving the Big 12? Where do you see them ending up? Do you see them in the Pac-12 and the MAC? That's really my guess is where they end up, but I'm interested in seeing how that pans out.